Anyway, what's the next tip?
So, the last tip that I've got is to have goals. Now, this means have goals in character, but also have goals out of character. So, having goals in character, why is your character adventurer? What do they actually want to accomplish? And it can be good to have goals such as to avenge the death of my parents. But if you're playing in a store game, that's not going to happen.
No.
And if you're playing in a home game and your GM is particularly busy, as a lot of GMs are,
and if
they might not be able to work it into the plot.
Yeah, if it doesn't really play into what everyone else wants to do as well, your whole little side plot about avenging your parents is just, it's a little bit masturbatory.
We talked about this before, about supporting the other people's plot lines, giving them screen time, and working with the others when it's your turn to have screen time. But have goals for your character. Have short-term goals for your character. Have long-term goals. Have goals that might not even be fulfilled in the adventure. At the moment, I am playing a mercenary on an online forum role-playing game on our Discord.
Not just any
mercenary, not just any online game.
Specifically our one.
Plug for our Discord.
Yeah, come role-play on our Discord with us.
So I'm playing Reynardo, a fox-headed mercenary, and he has just been offered the reward of a lifetime in exchange for his mission. And I started thinking about, what does his retirement look like? I am sure that if you, humble listener, were to receive $1 million in the lottery, you would have things that you would want to do with it. Yeah. And they might well include quitting your job. So,
buying a house or paying off a mortgage or,
seeing the world. And so what would your character do if they won? If they got $1 million? If they got the dragon sword? What does their happy ever after look like? I think Reynardo might go and pay off his family's debts. I think Reynardo might be interested in maybe starting his own mercenary company or retiring to an inn somewhere. I also think that Reynardo is the sort of person who will probably be frivolous with his money and fritter a lot of it away before he gets around to doing any of that.
You've just made me think of so this is something that people, the sort of questions that people say, ask this of your partner before you enter a serious relationship. Or if you're an actor, these are the sort of questions that they say if you're doing the Stanislavski technique, or, method acting, if you want to call it that. What would your character do if this, if that? What do they feel about XYZ? Basically, you should sort of look up lists like that on the internet when you're making your new character and think about these scenarios. So yeah, like the scenario of $1 million or any other scenario, really, what does your character think about?
Who is your character looking for in a relationship?
Yeah, what do they think about government?
Want children?
Yeah, what do they think about style of government? Do they like living with kings and queens if they're in your standard sort of medieval D&D thing, or are they looking to overthrow the monarchy?
Once again, I'm going to mention Legend of the Five Rings here. It has a system called 20 questions.
Oh, does it?
In which, in the current edition, answering the 20 questions makes your character while you do it.
Sweet.
But in the past, it's always been questions about what do you think about some of the core things in the setting. And the questions will range from things like what does honor mean to your character, to what would your character spend one koku on? If they got given some money, what would they go shopping for? What does your character do in their downtime to relax?
Yeah.
They don't train. Does your character go to the theatre? Does your character go to the pub?
Yeah.
Does your character like boating?
Yeah, there's so many questions out there. There's lots of different lists on the internet that you can sort of look at of questions. Or, yeah, like James was saying, in different role-playing books, different settings can ask you questions.
But not just thinking about what your character would do. Like we said right back at the beginning, you are responsible for your character. What are your goals for your character? How would you like to see them develop? Now, not all characters do develop and change, but...
Like Indiana Jones.
Indiana Jones stays as the same person. Yeah. Every time he sort of is a cynic who sort of becomes a little bit more spiritual, but he stays fundamentally the same person across all his movies. Some characters don't change. Some characters do change. And so here's 2 ideas about different character arcs that you could take for your character.
Hit me.
Fundamentally, Dungeons & Dragons and many other role-playing games are about a zero to hero character arc. Your character starts off as naive, inexperienced, and becomes powerful and able to take part in world-shaking events. So if you're playing in this sort of game, you might want to think about how does your character change over time. Don't have it all planned out point for point, but have your character have places where they're capable of growth. Let them develop over time. Let them be young and inexperienced and foolish at the beginning. And then look for opportunities where they might change what they're doing, or learn, or adapt, or grow. So that at the end you can see the great change that your character has gone through. I think your character that you played for Storm King's Thunder was a wonderful example of this.
Oh, she went through huge growth.
Started off as a spoilt brat, and by the end she was...
She went through so many changes. Like, she got betrayed by a lover.
She learned responsibility.
She got KO'd a couple of times, which made her a bit more cautious. She ascended to a position of leadership. Yeah, and so she was much more humble, though, in taking that. Like, you wouldn't want that spoilt little brat that she started off as to be the leader, but by the end of things, she had taken on this mantle, and it suited her then.
As she encountered the different types of giants and what they were all up to, that made her think about the nature of power, the nature of worthiness. A major theme in Storm King's Thunder is that the giants are feuding to decide what giants should be, what it means to be a giant. And in the end, that was something that your character had to address and had to decide. What did it mean to be a giant? What did it mean to be a person? How do we determine who is great?
I'll just use two examples. I won't go too into details just in case it is spoilers. The first giant leader she came up against, she accidentally bollocks her way into killing that giant. Or getting that giant to kill themselves.
Yes.
Whereas
you did give warnings.
She gave warnings, but it just sort of happened.
It wasn't intentional, but it wound up that the hill giant leader met an incredibly poetic justice sort of a fate.
The final giant leader she encountered, she threw down with single-handedly and then killed and then raised dead and said, "Have you learnt your lesson yet?"
I think she had to do that more than once.
Had to do it more than once, but basically, was trying to say, this is the nature of power. The important part wasn't killing the leader. I mean, there was certainly like a sort of domination aspect to that.
It is an unfortunate aspect of Dungeons & Dragons that you are expected to kill other things and other people as part of it.
But the actual show of power was, and I can bring you back. And I'm choosing to bring you back. And I want you to still lead your people. But I want you to see that mercy is the right way. Because she was trying to get that giant to stop killing humans and destroying towns and stuff. So that was how her relationship changed with power.
Now, on the other hand, you might want to have a character like Indiana Jones who doesn't really change over time. And if so, there is a wonderful, wonderful role-playing game that I think everyone can steal from called Hillfolk. And in Hillfolk is a role-playing game that's based around the sorts of dramatic television shows like The Sopranos, like Game of Thrones, which is about interesting people with strong personalities interacting with each other. Lots of dramatic conversations and arguments and negotiation. And so one of the central things it does to promote a game where the PCs argue with each other the whole time is it encourages players to have dramatic polls. So what this means is that many good characters in literature are torn between two or more opposing desires or motivations. For example, if you think of any mafia movie, just about every single character in a mafia movie is motivated by two goals, one of which is their desire to help the family, and the other is their loyalty to their personal family. Another example of this is Spider-Man.
Oh, yeah.
Who has the clearest example of these dramatic poles ever, which is summed up in his catchphrase.
Yeah.
Great power versus great responsibility. Superman wants to be a normal human, one of us, but he also wants to be the biggest superhero. He doesn't want to be, but he needs to be the biggest superhero. He needs to save us.
So it's his wants versus his needs.
It's his wants versus his needs, which is the same for Spider-Man.
Exactly.
Actually, it's the same for a lot of people. It's what you want versus what you need. And sometimes these can be very complicated things. Achilles goes to war with the choice that he can either have a long, inglorious life or a short, heroic life followed by a famous death. Yeah. He chooses glory and death.
Yeah.
The Iliad is the story of Achilles looking at that choice repeatedly and examining what he wants to do. Is it better to live or to be glorious?
Yeah. On the subject of goals and stuff, I was just thinking about like one of my worst characters I've ever played. Now, part of this isn't about goals. Part of this is just like the build-up that we had to this character. It was sort of like, oh, Claire's going to get to play this character one day, and it's going to be really, really good.
So this was in Pendragon, which is a generational game. It's also, if you haven't checked it out, Pendragon is, in my opinion, the greatest role-playing game of all time.
It is so good. And like James was saying, it's generational. So you're playing a family. So when one character dies, they could be replaced by their child or brother or sister or cousin. Like
you go into it knowing that your character will die, but that your characters will also live on.
So you're sort of stringing up a collection of people who are going to replace your current character, and you're watching your family bloodlines and sort of going, oh, this person was born then, so cool, there's a character coming up. Now this character was the son of my first character. She died, and her sister
abducted by fairies.
The son got abducted by fairies. So the sister of my first character, his auntie, went on this big quest to rescue him, and she died in rescuing him, and so it was this humongous thing. I finally got to play this character, and he just sucked. Now, it's all my fault that he sucked, and I'll tell you why. So James is saying the thing about having goals. My goals for that character were all sort of out of character sort of goals of like, I want my character to be perceived as like beautiful and mysterious, and so basically my goal was aesthetic and dumb. Like, it was so stupid. I should have actually had some goals for him in his life, but instead he was just sort of listless and just.
So what could you have done to make this character work better? I think you could have played up his fish out of water nature a bit more.
I should have probably gone for the comic relief stuff a bit more.
Well, that's a strength.
Play to your strengths, right? Like, don't try and play against your strengths. I can't play serious, mysterious characters because it's just not me.
I feel like the best serious characters you've had have been when your comic characters have come up against serious things as part of their stories.
Oh yeah, I mean, my character that I play most of the time is just a Steve Irwin pastiche, okay?
What if Steve Irwin was a druid? That is Claire's best character ever, and he's actually amazing.
I also know that it's completely unoriginal because I have heard at least 2 other people, one of whom role plays like online, does a stream online, say that they have a Steve Irwin druid. So like it's been done before.
This is what we were saying before about play with an archetype. There is nothing wrong with being a Steve Irwin druid. Yeah. It's a fun character archetype to play with.
But the reason why he works for me, so he's one of the types of characters, like James says, that doesn't so much have goals, but it's like, well, okay, he does. He comes into situations, he sees people suffering, and he goes, I'm going to fix this. He's basically like the Doctor.
He makes connections to the people in the world around him.
He goes, I see people suffering. I'm going to try and fix this in such a way that the majority of people get to live. Even sometimes, if he can do it, including the people who are making the people suffer in the first place, he'll try and make them realize the error of their ways. He tried to rescue Strahd. It didn't happen, of course, but he tried.
Well, did it? More on that later.
Yeah. So that character, at no point have I gone, I want Derwin to be perceived, that's the name of the character, I want Derwin to be perceived as beautiful and mysterious. No, he just goes in there and he doesn't care about what other people perceive him as.
Even though he's the only player in the game, he is still such a team player, because his main goals is he will find the people who have things that they need, and then he will go out of his way to help them with their goals.
And so many times he is just the comic relief to the other characters as well.
And yet, we have had some incredibly serious, meaningful role-playing sessions with him.
I think we'll definitely talk about Derwin and Curse of Strahd, but maybe we'll talk more about Derwin another day.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, like an aesthetic or how you want other people to perceive you, that's not a goal. Yeah. So I would say, yeah, come up with actual goals that don't rely on perception, but yeah, come up with achievable goals.
Would you say
play to your strengths?
Would you say that Derwin has changed over time?
He started off
as a
pastiche. I don't know if he's had an arc so much, but it's just that he started off, his characteristics, his personality and stuff were a Steve Irwin pastiche. And the things that he does, the actions that he takes in being welcoming to people and wanting to find out people's stories and stuff is just my response to being tired of murder hoboism. So his whole thing about walking into a tavern and talking to the most interesting looking person there, that's just who he is. And that hasn't really changed.
I feel like he's had parts of his personality reinforced.
Yeah, totally.
Or at times he's had to examine his beliefs.
He's also had failures.
But he's doubled down on his fundamental
Absolutely.
beliefs.
He's had moments of failure, which we'll get into more if we talk about him another time. He's not like a Mary Sue where everything goes right for him all the time. He has had times where things have gone utterly foobar, but instead of giving up, he's gone, right, I need to fix this now. Where do we go from here? He's very proactive.
He's reflective in a way about what he does.
Yeah.
Would you say he has dramatic pulls?
I feel like you're going to unpick this a little bit more in the future, and it's like, it's sort of a bit Spider-Man-ish of like power and responsibility. He does sort of rock up to places and say
my way or the highway.
And the question sort of is, at what point are you imposing your will on other people? He's always trying to be
the other people are an evil vampire lord who's literally and figuratively sucking the blood of his entire community. That's a relatively okay stance.
But if it were a whole civilization of people who are doing things that he's against, at what point does he become the person who is wrong? At what point is him imposing his morality on others? Yeah, at what point does that become a bad
correct
thing?
Or incorrect?
Yeah, so I'm sure we're going to unpick that together.
He does have that sort of tendency to resort to force when needs be.
Yeah.
For someone who doesn't believe in force.
Definitely. Yeah. It's gonna be interesting to see how that unfolds.